Well, my name is Jay Winuk. I'm a public relations professional by trade, but for most of the last 19 years, I've also been working as the co-founder and executive vice president of a nonprofit called My Good Deed, which is the organization that first began and continues to lead the September 11th National Day of Service and Remembrance. And I'll come back to the origins of that in a few minutes. I am a 9/11 family member. My brother Glenn Winuk was 3 years my junior, and we are two of three brothers. My brother Jeff is the oldest of the three of us. We grew up on Long Island, and on Long Island, Glenn was a volunteer firefighter and an EMT. For a time was commissioner of the Jericho Fire District. He was an officer in his engine company for a time. And he was very committed to the firefighting practice and community. But he lived and worked in New York City. So for 20 years, Glenn was an active firefighter, but he did live and work in New York City. He was a partner at the law firm Holland Knight, whose offices at the time were located at 195 Broadway, less than 2 blocks from the Trade Center. The morning of September 11th, Glenn was in his midtown apartment building, getting ready for work, and learned that the first tower had been hit by a plane. So he raced downstairs. The doorman in his building, who I spoke to later, told him, "Don't go down there." But Glenn was a firefighter. You know, he was going to do what firefighters do and what he was called to do. He got into a cab, got down to 195 Broadway, went upstairs, helped evacuate the Holland Knight law offices. And then from some of the first responders on the scene, borrowed a first responder kit and headed west on foot the 2 blocks up Day Street into the South Tower to save lives. In 1993, Glenn had responded also, given his training and proximity of his office to the Trade Center when the Trade Center was bombed then. So he had the training, he had the guts, he had the courage, he had the proximity to, as I say, do what firefighters do. They're a remarkable breed. They're a breed apart. You know, my older brother too was a volunteer firefighter so many years ago, and you know, as a family member of a firefighter, you just see the passion and the commitment and the fortitude, the courage, what it takes to run into burning buildings and other emergency situations that these men and women have who step forward as public safety officers to keep the rest of us safe, to save lives and property. We have never in all these years got to speak with anybody who spoke with Glenn in the South Tower. Most of them, of course, you know, perished. We don't know how many people he may have saved. We don't know if he got upstairs when his partial remains were found on March 20th, 2002. He was found among a group of other first responders, including just feet away from Moira Smith, who I believe was the only female police officer to have perished down at the Trade Center. And it was when they cleared the kind of temporary ramp that they built for the trucks to go up and down to pull out the debris during the rescue and recovery effort in favor of the more permanent ramp that soon before was put in place, that they found a whole bunch more remains of these first responders and others who had been in that spot in really what was the lobby area of the South Tower, that Glenn's partial remains were found. I got a call early that morning when somebody from the Jericho Fire Department, Glenn's fire department, called and said they think they found your brother, because that person in the fire department knew somebody who was actually on the scene, and Glenn's wallet was there. And so by that evening, a police officer knocked on my door at my home, where I'm speaking to you from now, in Putnam County in the town of Mahopac. And I knew when the doorbell rang at night — we don't get a lot of doorbells ringing at night in my house — that it must have been somebody to officially let me know that indeed Glenn's remains had been found. And it was a quick turnaround too. He was identified very quickly, as these things go, by his dental records. So, you know, it took some months to kind of get that confirmation as to where he had perished and where his final moments were. In that way, though, we consider ourselves fortunate, because so many families I know have no remains at all. We did, back in October of '01, have a memorial service, have a funeral without a body, which is a strange thing to go through. But then when his remains were found, we went back to the cemetery and properly buried his remains. In October, when we had his initial funeral, we followed a tradition that we learned that people who were Holocaust family members did, which was to bury belongings of the person that represented some element of their life. And so we got a pine box. It wasn't a coffin, but it was a pine box. And in that box, we buried, back in October '01, one of Glenn's law books from law school, some fire department memorabilia. He was a black belt in karate. We buried, one of his belts, some things from his childhood, small fire truck, some drawings done by my son Justin, who was 4 at the time he lost his uncle, that depicted his understanding of what had happened on 9/11. Some things from Glenn's Bar Mitzvah, just different elements that represented pieces of his very full and colorful life and his accomplishments while still among us. And then, as I say, once his remains were found, we went back to the cemetery and had a more proper funeral. Glenn was 40 when he died, not married, had a girlfriend, no children. He would regularly go back to Long Island on weekends to not only do his laundry at my parents' house, but also to run rescue missions and fight fires. At some point, when Glenn became a partner at Holland Knight, he had changed his status in the fire department from an active duty member to associate member, meaning that in the last few years of his life, he actually wasn't running rescue missions and fighting fires. His responsibilities as a partner at the law firm really made it difficult for him to devote the time that he felt was appropriate to keep his active duty status. He was still a member of the department. He maintained some level of his EMS credentials. In fact, he arranged for CPR training with some others at the Holland Knight offices so that colleagues of his at the law firm could be trained in CPR. And as it turned out, because he had changed his status from active to associate member, we had quite a battle with the United States of America to have Glenn formally designated as having died in the line of duty. Every other official sanctioning body that could did recognize both Glenn's credentials and actions that morning. But the Department of Justice battled with us for that, saying that he was a good Samaritan. This man who did not run into these buildings as an attorney, but ran in as a 20-year firefighter and EMT, who, by the way, was specially certified in building collapse rescue training. We eventually hired an attorney who in his own right was a firefighter, who knew of Glenn's story, and when he heard that the DOJ was resisting this posthumous honor that my family so craved and that this American hero deserved, was outraged. And this attorney, Andrew Duke Maloney from the Kreindler & Kreindler law firm, which had represented in the Victims' Compensation Fund many 9/11 families, he was outraged, and he said, well, we're going to get this fixed, and we'll get it fixed within 6 months. This is paperwork. And as it turned out, it went on for years, this battle, and was highly publicized. In the meantime, the New York State legislature unanimously passed a law recognizing Glenn as having died in the line of duty. It's a special law written just for him because of this situation, signed by Governor Pataki. The FDNY Honor Legion honored him as what we were told was the first non-member of the FDNY to be included in their ranks. The National Fallen Firefighters Foundation honored Glenn. His own fire department formally designated Glenn as having represented them on 9/11, recognized him as having perished in the line of duty representing their fire department. Department of Justice identified an independent arbitrator whose job it is to assess such situations and other kinds of situations, I guess, to hold a formal hearing at which members of Glenn's fire department, our family, former FDNY Fire Commissioner Tom Von Essen, and others gave testimony either in writing or in person. And the arbitrator ruled in Glenn's favor. We thought, oh, all right, finally this is done. The DOJ then overruled their own arbitrator, still fighting my parents and our family on this. Eventually it went to federal court in Washington, D.C., and Judge Marilyn Horn, in reading through the documents, taking testimonies, talking to attorneys from both sides, ruled in Glenn's favor and was outraged in her findings at the DOJ. The New York Times was one of many who reported on this situation. And at the end of the article, the writer Peter Applebaum wrote, "The problem will never be having too many people like Glenn Winuk. It will be having enough." And that was right. I mean, here was the DOJ discouraging such service. So in the end, Glenn's honor was upheld. He was formally designated by the federal government, by the United States of America, as having perished in the line of duty. And as a result, these years later, Glenn was finally awarded the 9/11 Heroes Medal of Valor from President Obama and Attorney General Holder, some long time after all the other first responders received this posthumous honor. So it all worked out okay, but it was a difficult situation over the course of many years, and if not for Duke Maloney from Kreindler and Kreindler, maybe we never would have gotten to that point where Glenn's country properly and formally recognized his actions. And it did get a lot of media coverage. I mean, and we had, bipartisan members of Congress who, Peter King and Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer and so many others, fire officials and other organizations. Everybody was like, how could this be? So it was a great moment of joy when we had a press conference in a park in Jericho named in Glenn's honor for Congressman King and Senator Chuck Schumer to formally present my parents and our family with the 9/11 Heroes Medal of Valor for Glenn. So that's, one saga, one piece of Glenn's story, which is, of course, made things more difficult for my family, for my parents in particular, who were both alive at the time and who no longer are. But we were gratified that it all worked out in the end. The Firefighters Memorial Wall across from Ground Zero, which is visited by millions of people a year, along the exterior of Engine 10, Ladder 10, the closest fire department to Ground Zero. That Firefighters Memorial Wall, 56 feet long in bronze, depicting the 9/11 story and the rescue efforts. The money for that was raised by Glenn's law firm as a gift to New York, and who worked very closely with the FDNY to get that done. And all the firefighters' names from the FDNY run along the bottom of it. And it's a beautiful piece of artwork. Adjacent to it is a special plaque for Glenn, recognizing his actions, and the Holland Knight Charitable Foundation, which was so instrumental in making this happen. I was honored to speak at the unveiling ceremony for that Firefighters Memorial Wall. And it was a scene I'll never forget. So many firefighters in uniform at the dedication, and members of the Holland Knight family, and so many others. It was an extraordinary time in New York, because that was unveiled well before the Memorial Plaza and Museum had opened. And it is the place where firefighter families go to pay their respects, so many of them, for their lost loved ones, so many of whom got no remains back. So that's part of Glenn's story. I'm very proud of him. He was a great brother, a great friend. We were very close. And he lived his life and died in service to other people. And his actions that day, and the actions of so many others, helped inspire the 9/11 National Day of Service and Remembrance. Soon after 9/11, I got a phone call from my good friend David Payne. We had known each other for years. We worked at the same public relations agency back in the 1980s, Burson Marsteller, which at the time was the world's largest public relations agency. And we worked in the New York office, not on the same accounts, but we knew each other and had shared friends and colleagues there. Some years after, David moved to California and started his own business and his own family there. But we stayed in touch, and he had heard that Glenn had perished. And David is a very creative, inspiring man. And in a lot of ways, he's a visionary. He's always coming up with great ideas. And in this case, he called me and said, what do you think about trying to start a grassroots initiative that would be a day of service each year on 9/11? A movement that reflects the way people were responding at the time, because he called me so soon after 9/11. Putting aside their differences. Anybody who was around at the time, and Shelley, I know you remember certainly, and so many of your listeners do, it was the most amazing time. As painful as those post 9/11 days and weeks were, people came together in ways that I had never seen in my lifetime. It was so inspiring. You know, we all just focused on our common humanity. We were all Americans. We weren't divided by politics. We weren't divided by money or geography or religion or sexual orientation or any of the things that typically tend to divide us. We were celebrating the great fabric that is this country, and everybody wanted to pitch in. And David's idea was, let's try to establish a ritual in this country that each year on 9/11 tries to replicate that and take the day back from the terrorists, not have them define for future generations what people learn about 9/11, that it wasn't just about the attacks, it was about the way good people of the world came together. I thought, you know, that's a pretty good idea. As I say, Glenn lived his life and died in service to other people. If I was going to get involved in something, maybe trying to establish a day where people are doing good deeds for other people in need would be a great thing to be involved in. But I said to David, look, you know, this is still pretty raw for my family. I'm just trying to keep my parents afloat here, and we've got a lot to deal with. Why don't we talk about it again in a month or two? But I like the idea. And we did revisit it some weeks later, and I said, you know what, I'm all in. Let's try to get this done. But I can't speak on behalf of and represent the whole 9/11 community, and we need to know that the 9/11 community would feel comfortable with a movement that tried to establish 9/11 as a day of service, as a day of people doing good deeds in honor of those lost, those injured, and those who rose in service. So we set about to meet with the leaders of so many 9/11 organizations that had cropped up in the early months, all working on very good causes, to get their feedback. Were we on the right road here? Was this something that they would be comfortable with? And to a person, every one of them was in favor of this idea. Trying to start a day of service. So at least we felt like, you know, we had the wind at our back, that we were going to be on the right track. We may not get there, but at least we were doing something that was comfortable within those who were within the 9/11 community. So we set up a website and we did some initial research. people around the country, would they be interested? Would they participate? Why would they participate? What do they understand about this? And, just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Eventually, we established officially a nonprofit organization, which is still called My Good Deed. At the time, we called it One Day's Pay, but people misconstrued the concept. They thought we were trying to get people to donate money, one day's salary. And it wasn't about money at all. It was about a day of doing good deeds. And so we just kept trying to get the word out. It's a lot easier now to get the word out with social media and other tools than it was then, but we held our first press conference in New York City. We were very bold. We thought, in Washington, D.C. Our second was in New York City. We went down to Washington because we were also working the halls of Capitol Hill trying to get federal support for this. Because one of our goals was to get the anniversary federally designated as a National Day of Service and Remembrance. We eventually got there. It took some years. In 2009, we were successful with that, and I'll come back to that. So we thought, while we're in Washington doing the groundwork for this, we'll stage a press conference. We're a couple of PR guys, and we had a board of directors, and we had made connections with other people within the service community, along with people from the 9/11 community, and we rented out a room in the National Press Club. And we're like, you never know at a press conference who's actually going to show up. So we went to do a morning TV interview before the press conference. I forget which program. I think it was the Today Show. And we were running late, and we raced into the National Press Club, not knowing we didn't have any media there at all for this announcement that was so important to us and to others in the 9/11 community. And we walked into this room that we had rented, and we thought, we're going to need a bigger room. There were so many media, Shelley, that were there, that were interested in covering this idea, this story of the 9/11 community and many of its friends who wanted to make 9/11 a day of service in this country. So that was another really great step forward. It got plenty of coverage, the Washington Post and the LA Times and Associated Press and TV coverage. And we thought, we felt even more that we were on the right track. And so there were times along the way where we thought maybe this is running out of steam. The further you get away from something like 9/11, people move on with their lives. And you have to raise money to keep it going and to get more and more people involved and to get companies involved so their employees understand about it and other nonprofits. And it takes money to get things like this going and sustained and then grow. But one way or another, we kept going and kept building on it to the point where, yes, in 2009, under the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act, there's language in there that formally designates, under federal law, the anniversary of September 11th as a National Day of Service and Remembrance. And now it is one of only two, along with the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr., so designated under federal law. And we have grown it into, with the help of many others, the nation's largest annual day of charitable engagement. The research we do every few years by an independent research company last indicated that more than 30 million Americans participated, mark the day by doing some kind of good deeds for people in communities in need. But that's still only about 1/10 of the country. So we have a lot of good work ahead of us to do. The morning of 9/11, I was sitting pretty much right where I'm sitting right now in my home office above the garage at our house in Mahopac, New York. And I got a phone call from a close friend who said, "Did you hear what happened in the city just now?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Turn on your TV." So I have a TV in the office, and I turned on the TV just in time to see the second plane hit. And I thought, oh my God, and then, my immediate thought went to Glenn because I knew where his office was. And I knew he responded in 93. And I knew he was a 20-year volunteer firefighter and EMT. And I knew that if he could be there, he would be there. I had spoken to him just the night before. Because earlier that day, I had gone to pay my respects to a family who had lost their dad, close friend from we were very close friends with this family. And indeed, the dad who had passed away had been a fellow firefighter of Glenn's in Jericho. So I went to New Jersey to pay my respects. And Glenn and I spoke the night of September 10th to ask me how it went, because his plan was to go after work the next day on the 11th. So I told him approximately where it was and who was there. And, we just talked about things related to that. But that morning, the next morning, September 11th, once I realized what was going on down at the Trade Center, of course, like so many other people, I started calling Glenn immediately at his apartment, on his cell phone, in his office, and got nowhere with that. But I knew he knew how to handle himself, and he had, responded to emergencies hundreds and hundreds of times before. But like everybody else in the country, I was glued to the TV, primarily CNN, and watched as things unfolded. And then when the towers came down, my concern kicked into a much higher level, but still understanding that he was likely there and likely not about to call anybody back. But those hours passed, and I was speaking, of course, with my parents and my brother and other relatives and friends. And, people came to realize, well, he had to be down there because we would have otherwise heard from him. I wasn't able to reach anybody at his law firm. By that evening, we were pretty freaked out because we had thought, well, at this point, somebody would have heard from him. And then we started gathering the troops. The next few days were about getting people to call around to hospitals, trying to find somebody who may have seen him or talked to him. Everybody was holding out hope that, okay, maybe, their loved one got hit in the head and was just kind of wandering around, or buried somewhere floors below the Trade Center, and, there's retail down there and there's food, and who knows, there was a great chance of survival, we thought, for some people. There was reason to have hope. But, the days passed and the hope became very slim. But we didn't give up hope until Mayor Giuliani and other officials said this is no longer a rescue effort. It's now a recovery effort. Nobody else is going to come out of there alive. And so, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that's when we started planning a memorial service, which we held out at the Jericho Jewish Center, where all three of us, the three Winuk boys, got Bar Mitzvah, and was right next door to the Jericho Fire Department. And we held a memorial service and then went to the cemetery. But that day was harrowing. It went from Boy, I bet my brave brother is right down there in the mix, you know, doing what he does to, by that night, it was horrific to contemplate that he very well may have perished when one or the other building came down. So that's what that day was like. Like everybody else, I'll never forget it. You know, there were emotions and fear and confusion like I've never had before. Fortunately, I have a very strong wife, my wife Carolyn, who did so much to keep me going in those hours and days, and who kept my family going. Really, I mean, she became the backbone of our family. You know, cousins and uncles and aunts and so many others, and then Glenn's friends and colleagues, and there were so many people who, as it was, I'm sure, for many families, who were just trying to be helpful and having questions and wanting to talk, and some of that's so helpful, just hearing from so many people and getting so many offers. And it's also a lot to handle as you're dealing with something that is both personal and so public. To lose somebody in such a public way is a challenge. It's not a normal way to lose somebody. Glenn's death is no more or less important than anybody else's. And we all face tragedies, and we all lose people that we love in our lives. I never for a minute think that his loss is any more important than anybody else's. But as we know in the 9/11 community, to lose somebody like this as part of a mass murder, as part of a terrorist act, something that is so public, it's a different way to lose somebody. There's no training for that. And it's nothing I would ever want to wish on anybody else. For me, working on the 9/11 day observance is therapeutic. It is the best thing I feel like I could do in Glenn's honor, to get people to do good deeds in honor and as a way to never forget. Because that's the kind of person he was. I often tell people he would have been first in line for this kind of initiative. He was just a very giving, caring person. I will tell you that within a few days of 9/11 happening, because Glenn's law firm had to move out of their building was evacuated. And so suddenly, you know, where did they all go? What do they all do? Imagine the impact on so many businesses down there that suddenly didn't have an office to go to. And how do they communicate with each other? And how do they comfort each other, much less get back to doing the business of the company? But within a few days, I heard from both the managing partner of Glenn's law firm, Holland Knight, Bill Honan, and then the managing partner of the whole firm, because they have many offices around the country, Bob Fagan, to tell me what they knew about Glenn's last steps and what they were going to do to help potentially find Glenn and to support our family. And I didn't know either gentleman before. And they were so helpful to me and my family in keeping us going and giving us information that they were finding out. And as a law firm, they had a lot of resources, investigative resources, and resources with government officials and others. And so we had the benefit of their counsel and their strength to to help keep us informed about this situation that was nothing but question marks. And so I became very close with many people in Glenn's law firm over those recent years, and they continue to be very important players in the 9/11 Day of Service. In their offices around the country, they volunteer on this day and they pay tribute to Glenn and all the first responders and all those who rose in service. They work hard to keep his memory alive and to make sure that people never forget not only about Glenn, but about the events of 9/11. So they're a really important part of Glenn's story.
Just one last question. Do you view life and death differently now?
I do. It's a good question. I try to appreciate each day more. We all say we're going to do that, but the busyness of life, I guess, sometimes gets in the way of appreciating each day. But I do work hard at that too, because, you know, you never know. Nobody ever knows when their last day is going to be, whether you're a first responder or not, you know. And so we all like to think we're going to live to old age, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I do try to appreciate each day. I certainly, even though, you know, both of my brothers were firefighters, since 9/11, I have an extra appreciation for first responders at a different level than I had before. And I think as a nation, since 9/11, we take them for granted less than we did before. You know, I think there's a tendency to not think so much about the important role of firefighters and police and EMTs until you need one. I think 9/11 changed a lot of that. I do think it's shameful that first responders from 9/11 who were sick and suffering as a result of exposure at ground zero had to fight for so many years so hard to get the support that they needed, the financial support that they needed. But a lot of progress, as you know, has been made in that front finally. But yeah, I think, you know, that's the biggest life lesson, to try to appreciate each day, because you never know, you know, when that comes to an end. You know, we have goals for the 20th anniversary of 9/11. The eyes of the world are going to be focused on 9/11. And as an organization, we, of course, want to make participation in the 9/11 Day of Service even greater than it's ever been before. We think it's an opportunity to look back on what we've learned since those attacks and what we need to do better moving forward. I think it's an opportunity to educate young people, so many of whom weren't alive or have no direct memories of 9/11, even more about the day and the opportunity that they have to impact and make better the world around them. But September 11th in 2021 is going to be the biggest story in the world. And there's a lot of good work that can be done coming out of that.
Amen to that. Thank you.